Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Rachel Rubel. A potential humanitarian crisis that the world was warning against for weeks has been averted, at least for now. The Syrian regime's planned offensive into the last rebel stronghold of Idlib in the country's northwest has been called off. The dramatic turnaround came after a whirlwind meeting in the Russian resort city of Sochi between Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin. The two leaders agreed to set up a demilitarized zone along the edges of Idlib province and expel rebels, mostly al-qaeda-linked HTS militants from the area. In their place, Turkish troops, along with Russian soldiers, will patrol a narrow buffer zone separating the rebel stronghold from regime-held areas. The patrols will also ensure that there is no heavy weaponry inside the buffer zone. The international community has hailed the move as Idlib's more than 3 million residents sighed a sense of relief. The agreement is set to come into effect before October 15th. Turkish President Erdogan has described the agreement as a step toward peace.
Her iki tarafın savunma bakanları artık o belgeye imzayı attılar. Bu İdlib'de artık kan dökülmesin. Artık gözyaşı dinsin. İşte bu sınırlarımızın ötesinde bir barışa adımdı.
And joining me now, Yasser Tabara, who is a senior fellow at Omran Center for Strategic Studies, and Michael Baum, who is a journalist at Moscow Times. Thank you both for joining me today. Michael, I want to start with you there in Moscow. At previous talks over Syria, Russia was not willing to agree to a ceasefire, but now we have this agreement for a safe zone. What has changed this time around?
Well, I think it's an attempt by Russia to make amends with Turkey, because as you mentioned, a week ago, the meeting in Tehran broke down over this issue of when to start the military offensive, and I think this is an attempt to please Turkey, because Turkey, of course, was against that military offensive in Idlib. But I think there's some deceit involved here, because I think both parties understand that it's just a matter of delaying the offensive, but at least it fulfills the needs of Turkey at this particular moment. Russia's very interested and very needs to keep good relationships with Turkey. It's a way to lessen the fundamental contradiction between Turkey and Russia in Syria, because of course Russia supports the Assad regime, and Turkey supports the opposition. So they're on opposite sides. This is an attempt to find a common point.
Yasser, do you agree that this agreement between Turkey and Russia is simply just delaying this offensive, or is this offensive that we've been talking about for weeks no more now?
Well, I mean, the Turkish efforts that have been taking place in the area for a while now go in the direction that the Turks have been very serious in putting a stop to any serious offensive against this densely populated area with over 3 million people. About 1.5 million or a little less than 1.5 million have been internally displaced from other areas that have suffered greatly. Turkey has a tremendous interest in that not translating into another refugee crisis, flooding into Turkish borders. Yes, there is a danger of this being a delay, simply a delay, not an aversion. But when we look at what the Turks have been doing with the opposition factions, the moderate opposition factions in Idlib, in terms of reorganizing, in terms of supporting, in terms of also looking at the civic governance structures that have been in Idlib for the past many years, over, I would say, over 5 or 6 years, and supporting those structures, then we see that, again, the Turks are serious about this being contained as much as possible. Hopefully, it will not re-explode. But we should keep in mind, however, in terms of a humanitarian crisis, we're talking in these terms, that the overwhelming majority, disproportionate majority of the mayhem and the destruction that has been taking place in Syria in general and in Idlib in particular has been the direct cause of aerial bombardment, which is monopolized by the Syrian Air Force and the Russian Air Force in that area.
You talked about that some 3 million people in the Idlib area who would have been affected by this offensive, and many of the refugees would have flowed into Turkey. Many would have also flowed into Europe. Do you think Turkey is sort of acting as a representative on Europe's interests in regards to this?
Well, I suppose de facto. I mean, Turkey has its own national interests and own national security considerations, but the Europeans are definitely have been invested in Idlib not spilling over and becoming another humanitarian disaster. Absolutely. We saw the Germans, for example, have taken overt or explicit steps in terms of supporting the Turkish efforts in the area and exerting their own form of diplomatic quasi-military pressure when they have hinted to the use of bombardment in case that the regime resorts to chemical weapons, etc. So yes, I mean, I think that the European at large interest and the Turkish interest are deeply intertwined in this particular question.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you talked about Putin wanting to get back in with good relations with Turkey. So do you think that this is a sign of the United States' diminishing role in the region and Russia sort of filling that place?
Well, I think there's room for both parties. I mean, there's two zones of operations. The American Kurdish zone is east of the Euphrates River. The Russian, Turkish, Syria is in the west. And I think Russia and the U.S. both recognize, and there's an agreement of to avoid escalation, that Russia won't get in the way of the U.S. coalition on the east side, and the U.S. coalition won't get in the way of Russia, Syria, Turkey on the west side. But if I'd like to add to what Yasser said about, I think this is clearly, and I think most people agree, is clearly a delay tactic. I think it'll help only slightly improve Russian-Turkish relations because there was an agreement on Monday on this demilitarization zone. But, I mean, the problem is clear that the terrorists clearly won't accept it. So I think that means that a military offensive after the deadline, which is October 10th, a military offensive, the Syrian offensive, is inevitable. Second, I think Russian is interested, Russian supports the military offensive for two reasons. The first reason is that I don't think Russia disagrees with the principal position of Assad, that yes, Russia and Assad have to destroy the terrorists. But besides the terrorists, and Yasser's figures may differ from mine, but in Idlib there's about 10,000 that are considered terrorists and about 40,000 that are considered opposition. The problem is that Assad wants to destroy all of them, anybody that's against the regime. And I think by all indications, Russia supports that principal position. So this is a delay tactic because it's clear that after October 10th, a military offensive will go through.
So, Yasser, do you agree with what Michael is saying there? He's saying that the terrorists won't accept this deal. I mean, that's a good question. How can Turkey successfully disarm these terrorist groups such as the HTS? And what risks are likely to develop if these groups refuse to comply?
I mean, that's the million-dollar question, right? And that's the huge challenge facing the Turks in Idlib. Not only facing the Turks, but also facing the Syrian opposition in Idlib that have been suffering directly from the presence of HTS and Hurras ad-Din, which are the more extreme factions, fighting factions on the ground in Idlib. And I agree with Michael's numbers. I think more or less in terms of the fighters, these are the numbers. But one has to also look at how many of these fighters are immigrants and how many of them are Syrians. And I think there lies part of the answer. Turkey has been implementing a solution with, the opposition on the ground, where it has established or helped establish something called Jabhat al-Tahrir al-Watani, or the National Front, that brought together a number of moderate groups together that form over 40,000 fighters. Within HTS fighters, I would say anywhere between 20 to 30% are Syrians, and those could potentially be the subject of some sort of a disarmament, demilitarization, and reintegration in some of the other, or in that national front that has been established or has been supported by Turkey and by the opposition. Yeah. So I think the challenge is absolutely tremendous, but there are a lot of indications, including the Russians, perhaps one of their first instances of distinguishing between, making a clear distinction between moderate opposition fighters and extremists. And I think that is a healthy sign for us to move forward and hope that Turkey will succeed in this challenge along with the Syrian opposition in Idlib.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Yasser Tabara and Michael Baum, thanks to the both of you for joining us today.